The mafia boss's baby wouldn't stop crying on the plane until a single mother did the unthinkable. The infant's screams pierced through the first-class cabin like shattered glass, relentless and desperate. Every passenger within earshot winced, shifted uncomfortably, or shot irritated glances toward the source of the disturbance. But none dared to complain. Not when they saw the man holding the child. Vincent Romano sat rigidly in his seat, his jaw clenched so tight it could crack diamonds. The custom-tailored black suit that normally made him look like a dark angel now seemed to constrict around him like a prison. His normally cold, calculating eyes held a flicker of something foreign. Raw, unfiltered panic. The baby, his son, continued to wail, tiny fists flailing against Vincent's chest. 2 months old, and already bearing the weight of a crown he didn't ask for. 2 months since Sophia had taken her last breath bringing this child into the world. 2 months since Vincent Romano, the most feared man in the American underground, had become something he never thought possible. Helpless, one of his bodyguards leaned in carefully, speaking low enough that other passengers couldn't hear. "We could land early. Find a no." Vincent's voice was still wrapped in silk. "We stay on schedule." But the baby didn't care about schedules. He didn't care that his father controlled half the East Coast's criminal operations. That men crossed streets to avoid his shadow. That entire families had disappeared at his word. The infant only knew hunger, discomfort, and the absence of the warmth he'd known for 2 precious months before it was stolen away. Vincent had tried everything. Bottles prepared by the nanny who waited at their destination. Pacifiers that the child spat out with surprising force. Rocking motions that felt awkward in his arms that were more accustomed to signing death warrants than soothing cries. Nothing worked. 3 rows ahead, Jessica Harper heard the desperate cries and felt her body respond instinctively. Her breasts act with sympathetic letdown, milk threatening to soak through the nursing pads she still wore, despite the fact that she closed her eyes, forcing down the wave of grief that always came with that thought. 6 months. It had been 6 months since she'd held her own daughter. 6 months since the tiny heart had simply stopped beating in the night. No explanation, no warning. Sudden infant death syndrome, the doctors had said, as if putting a name to the nightmare made it hurt less. Jessica had been heading home from a grief counseling conference in New York, trying to put her shattered life back together. She was a pediatric nurse, or at least she had been. After losing Grace, she couldn't bring herself to return to the NICU. Couldn't watch other people's babies thrive while hers lay cold in the ground. The crying intensified, and Jessica felt tears prick her own eyes. She knew that sound, the desperate, hungry wail of an infant who needed something primal, something only a mother could provide. Her hands trembled as she gripped the armrests. "Miss, are you all right?" The flight attendant paused beside her, concerned. Jessica looked up, then back toward where the crying originated. "That baby. He sounds I'm a nurse. Maybe I can help." The attendant's expression shifted to something between relief and skepticism. "The passenger has been quite firm about not wanting assistance, but if you'd like to try, I suppose it couldn't hurt." Jessica unbuckled her seat belt before she could second-guess herself, following the attendant down the aisle. With each step, her heart pounded harder. This was insane. She was still lactating. Her body hadn't gotten the memo that there was no longer a baby to feed. But she couldn't just offer to breastfeed a stranger's child, could she? Then she saw him. Vincent Romano sat like a king on a throne, even in distress. Black hair swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from marble by an angry god. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened by precisely maintained stubble, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He wore power like a second skin, and danger rolled off him in ways that made her survival instinct scream to turn around. But the baby in his arms looked so small, so helpless against that broad chest. The infant's face was red from crying, tiny features scrunched in misery. "Sir," the flight attendant began nervously. "This passenger is a nurse." She wondered if she might. Vincent's gaze snapped to Jessica, and she felt the impact like a physical blow. Those eyes could strip flesh from bone, could make grown men confess sins they hadn't even committed. For a moment, Jessica forgot how to breathe. "A nurse," he repeated, his voice low and rough like gravel wrapped in velvet. An accent lingered at the edges. Italian probably, though Americanized by years in the States. Pediatric, Jessica heard herself say, though her voice sounded far away. I know that cry. He's hungry. I've tried the bottle. Frustration cracked through Vincent's controlled exterior. He won't take it. Jessica's eyes moved from the man to the baby, and something in her chest cracked open. The infant's cries had taken on a desperate edge, the kind that spoke of real distress. She'd heard it too many times in the NICU, and her body responded before her brain could catch up. Some babies won't take artificial nipples, she said softly, stepping closer despite every instinct telling her to run from this dangerous man. Especially if they were breastfed initially. Was his mother? Something shifted in Vincent's expression. A flash of such raw pain that Jessica caught her breath. She died, he said flatly. 8 weeks ago, giving birth to him. The cabin seemed to go silent around them, though the baby still cried. Jessica's eyes burned with unshed tears. Her grief recognizing his even as her nurse's training kicked in. Then he's probably refusing the bottle because he's looking for something familiar, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something he associates with comfort and safety. Their eyes locked, and Jessica saw the exact moment he understood what she was implying. His jaw tightened, and for a second she thought he might order her away. But then the baby let out another desperate wail, and something in the untouchable mafia boss crumbled. Are you offering what I think you're offering? His voice was dangerous testing, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Jessica swallowed hard. This was beyond insane. But the baby was suffering, and her body was producing milk that had nowhere to go. And maybe, just maybe, she could help this tiny life even though she'd failed to save her own. I'm still producing, she admitted, her cheeks flushing. I lost my daughter 6 months ago. My body hasn't. I haven't been able to stop it. If you'd allow me, I could try. The silence that followed was deafening. Every passenger in first class had gone quiet, sensing they were witnessing something profound, even if they couldn't quite understand what. Vincent Romano stared at this woman, this stranger who had just offered the most intimate gift one human could give another, and felt the ground shift beneath him. In his world, there were no gifts. Everything had a price. Every kindness hit a blade. But this woman's eyes held only compassion and a grief that mirrored his own. The restroom, he said abruptly, standing with fluid grace despite the child in his arms. It's more private. Jessica's heart hammered as she followed him toward the first-class lavatory, acutely aware of the bodyguard who fell into step behind them. This was real. This was actually happening. The bathroom was small but luxurious, as an airplane bathroom could be. Vincent stood in the doorway, his large frame taking up most of the space, hesitation written across features that probably hadn't shown uncertainty in years. I'll wait outside, he said finally, his voice rough. Unless you need, I'll be fine, Jessica assured him, though her hands shook as she reached for the baby. What's his name? The word came out like a prayer and a curse. After my grandfather. Jessica took the infant carefully, cradling his small body against her chest. Mateo's cries had diminished to hiccuping whimpers, as if he sensed something was about to change. She looked up at Vincent, at this dangerous, powerful man who had just entrusted her with his most precious possession, and saw vulnerability that took her breath away. I'll take care of him, she promised. Vincent nodded once, sharp and controlled, then stepped back to let her close the door. The moment it clicked shut, Jessica felt the weight of what she was about to do settle over her like a blanket. Her hands moved on autopilot, unbuttoning her blouse with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The nursing bra came next, and then she was positioning Mateo at her breast, supporting his tiny head the way she'd supported so many infants in the NICU. For a moment, nothing happened. Mateo whimpered, turning his face against her skin, searching. Then his instincts kicked in, and he latched on, and Jessica felt the familiar pull and release as he began to nurse. Tears streamed down her face, silently, as she looked down at the baby in her arms. He wasn't Grace. He would never be Grace. But he was a child who needed comfort, who needed nourishment, who needed the one thing her body was still desperate to provide. It's okay, little one, she whispered, stroking his dark hair. It's okay. Outside the door, Vincent Romano stood with his fists clenched at his sides, his bodyguard wisely maintaining distance. The silence that had replaced his son's cries was both a relief and a torment. He'd just handed Mateo to a complete stranger. He who trusted no one, who verified the background of every person who came within 10 feet of his child, had just given his son to a woman whose last name he didn't even know. But something about her had reached through the armor he'd built around himself. Maybe it was the grief in her eyes that matched his own. Maybe it was the desperate courage it took to offer such an intimate kindness to a stranger. Or maybe it was simply that for the first time in 8 weeks, someone had offered to help without wanting something in return. When the bathroom door opened 15 minutes later, Jessica emerged with Mateo sleeping peacefully in her arms. The infant's face was relaxed, his tiny fist curled against her chest, completely at peace. Vincent looked at his son truly peaceful for the first time since Sophia's death and felt something shift in his chest. Something dangerous. Something that in his world could get people killed. "He's asleep," Jessica said unnecessarily, her voice soft to avoid waking the baby. "He ate well. He'll probably sleep for a few hours now." She moved to hand Mateo back, but Vincent's hand shot out to stop her, his fingers wrapping around her wrist with surprising gentleness. "Your name?" he demanded, though his tone had lost its edge. "Harper. Vincent Romano." He released her wrist, taking Mateo from her arms with practiced care. His son barely stirred, too content to wake. "I owe you a debt, Jessica Harper." "You don't owe me anything." Jessica began buttoning her blouse, suddenly aware of how intimate this situation was. "I was happy to help. In my world, everything comes with a price." Vincent's eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And what you just did, feeding my son, giving him peace when nothing else could, that's not something I can simply walk away from." Something in his tone made Jessica's heart race with more than attraction. It sounded almost like a warning. "I should get back to my seat." The word was command, not request. Vincent shifted Mateo to one arm with the ease of someone who'd been doing this alone for weeks, then pulled a business card from his suit pocket. "Call me when we land. I want to properly thank you." Jessica took the card reflexively, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent electricity up her arm, and from the slight widening of his eyes, he'd felt it, too. "That's not necessary." "It is to me." His voice had gone soft. "Dangerous. You gave my son something precious. The least I can do is buy you dinner." Jessica knew she should say no. Everything about this man screamed danger, from the way other passengers averted their eyes when he passed to the bodyguards who shadowed his movements. But there was something in his expression when he looked at his son, a vulnerability that called to her own broken heart. "Dinner." She found herself agreeing. "Just dinner." A ghost of a smile touched Vincent's lips, transforming his face from dangerous to devastatingly handsome. "Just dinner," he echoed, though something in his tone suggested he was making a promise neither of them understood yet. Jessica returned to her seat in a daze. The warmth of Mateo's small body still imprinted on her skin. She didn't notice the way Vincent's bodyguards were already pulling up information on her. Didn't see the calculating look in Vincent's eyes as he watched her walk away. In his world, in the world of the American Mafia, where tradition ran deeper than blood, what had just happened wasn't simple. It wasn't just a kind stranger helping a child in need. In the old ways, the ways his grandfather had taught him, the ways that still governed the ancient families, a woman who nursed a Dawn's child became bound to that family, became bound to him. Jessica Harper had just fed his son. She'd given Mateo the one thing Vincent couldn't provide, the one thing he'd been desperate for since Sophia's death. In doing so, she'd fulfilled a role that, in the traditions of their world, made her something sacred, made her his. Vincent looked down at his peacefully sleeping son and felt the ghost of his grandfather's words echo through his mind. When a woman feeds your child from her own body, she becomes the child's mother. And a Dawn's child can have only one mother, his queen. He hadn't believed in the old ways, not really. They were superstitions, traditions from a different era. But holding Mateo truly at peace for the first time since birth, Vincent felt the weight of those ancient rules settling over him like a mantle. Jessica Harper didn't know it yet, but the moment she'd offered to feed his son, she'd stepped into his world. And in his world, some things were sacred. Some bonds couldn't be broken. Some debts could only be paid one way. The plane continued its journey through the clouds, carrying two broken souls toward a destiny neither had seen coming. Jessica Harper, the pediatric nurse running from her grief, and Vincent Romano, the mafia boss who just found something more precious than power. someone who could give his son the love of a mother. But love in his world came with a price. And that price was written in tradition older than America itself. Jessica had saved his son's life tonight. Even if she didn't realize it, Mateo had been slowly starving, refusing every bottle, growing weaker each day. The doctors had talked about feeding tubes, about hospitalization. But one act of compassion from a stranger had solved what weeks of medical intervention couldn't. And Vincent Romano always paid his debts. Always. The black SUV that picked up Jessica from the airport 2 days later was not what she'd expected. She'd imagined a normal restaurant, maybe something upscale given Vincent's obvious wealth. Instead, the driver, a mountain of a man with cold eyes and an earpiece, had escorted her into a vehicle that screamed federal protection or something darker. The windows were tinted so dark she couldn't see out, and the locks engaged with an ominous click the moment her door closed. "Where are we going?" Jessica tried to keep her voice steady as the SUV pulled into traffic. "The Dawn's estate, miss." The driver's eyes met hers in the rear-view mirror. "He thought you'd be more comfortable with a private dinner." Given the baby, the Dawn, not Vincent, not Mr. Romano, the Dawn. Jessica's stomach twisted as pieces began clicking into place. The bodyguards on the plane, the way passengers had given him a wide berth, the ease with which he commanded others, the casual use of the title Dawn, a title she knew from crime dramas and news reports about organized crime. Oh God, what had she gotten herself into? The SUV wound through the streets of Newark before heading into the suburbs, each mile taking them farther from public spaces and closer to sprawling estates hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. When they finally turned through a particular gate, this one guarded by 2 men with very obvious weapons, Jessica felt her heart climb into her throat. The estate was massive, a sprawling mansion that looked like something out of The Godfather. Manicured lawns stretched in every direction, and Jessica counted at least 4 other security personnel patrolling the grounds before the SUV pulled up to the main entrance. "Miss Harper." A woman in her 60s appeared at the door, her severe expression softening slightly as she looked Jessica over. "I'm Rosa, the house manager. Romano is waiting in the nursery. If you'll follow me." Nursery, right? Because this was about Mateo. Jessica clung to that thought as Rosa led her through a home that belonged in Architectural Digest. Marble floors, priceless artwork, furniture that cost more than Jessica's yearly salary. Everything screamed wealth and power and danger. They climbed a grand staircase to the 2nd floor, and Jessica heard it before she saw it. Mateo's cries, not as desperate as on the plane, but still distressed. Rosa opened a door to reveal a nursery that was both opulent and surprisingly warm, decorated in soft blues and silvers with a mural of clouds covering one wall. Vincent stood by the window, Mateo wailing in his arms, his expression tight with frustration. He'd shed the suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle, and Jessica's breath caught. Extensive tattoos that disappeared beneath the fabric. Not regular tattoos. These were deliberate, symbolic. She recognized a few of the images. A crown, what looked like family crests, the kind of ink that told stories in the criminal underworld. His voice was rough with relief as he turned. "Thank God. He's been asking for you. Asking for me." Jessica's voice came out higher than intended. "Vincent, what is this? Who are you really?" Something flickered in his dark eyes. Respect maybe that she was asking directly. He gestured to Rosa, who slipped out silently, closing the door behind her. Suddenly, Jessica was alone with the most dangerous-looking man she'd ever met and his crying infant. "I think you already know," Vincent said quietly, still rocking Mateo. "You're smart. You've put the pieces together. You're with the mafia." It wasn't a question. "I am the mafia. At least I'm the head of the Romano family. We control most of the operations from here to Boston. Shipping, construction, waste management. Some legitimate, some." He paused. "Less legitimate." Jessica backed toward the door, her hand fumbling for the handle. "I need to leave. Mateo needs you." Vincent's voice stopped her, not because it was commanding, but because it was broken. "Look at him, Jessica. Really look." Against her better judgment, Jessica did. The baby in Vincent's arms was thinner than he'd been on the plane. His cries had a weak quality to them that made her nurse's instincts scream alarm. Dark circles shadowed his tiny eyes, and his skin had lost the healthy flush infants should have. "What happened?" She was moving forward before she could stop herself. He looked fine 2 days ago. He won't eat. Vincent's jaw clenched. Not the bottle, not anything. He took one bottle the night we landed, and since then, he's refused everything. The pediatrician wants to hospitalize him. Put in a feeding tube. But his voice cracked. I can't do that to him. He's already lost his mother. If I could give him what he needs, I would. But you can't. Jessica finished, understanding flooding through her. She reached for Mateo, and the moment the baby was in her arms, his cries diminished to whimpers. He turned his face against her chest, rooting instinctively. Oh, sweetheart, you're so hungry, aren't you? I'm sorry. Vincent ran a hand through his hair, the gesture making him look younger, more vulnerable. I know this isn't fair to you. I know I have no right to ask, but when I saw how he responded to you on the plane, how peaceful he was. Jessica, I haven't seen my son peaceful since the day he was born. Not once. Jessica looked from the baby in her arms to the man before her. This terrifying, powerful, dangerous man who was also a desperate father trying to save his child. She thought of Grace, of how she would have moved heaven and earth to keep her daughter alive, how she'd have begged, borrowed, or stolen anything that could have prevented that terrible morning. This is insane, she whispered. I know you're a criminal. Yes, I should run out that door and never look back. Probably, but he needs to eat. Jessica looked down at Mateo, whose whimpers had turned to hiccuping sobs as he continued to search for sustenance. And I can help him. I'll pay you. Vincent spoke quickly, urgently. Whatever you want, a salary, a house, anything. Just help him. Please. They did it. This man, who clearly wasn't used to asking for anything, who probably ruled his world with absolute authority, was begging her to save his son. Can you give us privacy? Jessica asked quietly. Vincent nodded and moved toward the door, but Jessica's voice stopped him. Wait, I need to know something first. She met his eyes directly, refusing to look away, despite how intimidating he was. On the plane, you said I'd stepped into your world, that what I did created some kind of debt. What did you mean? A muscle in Vincent's jaw ticked. For a long moment, he didn't answer, and Jessica thought he might not. Then he sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of tradition. My grandfather was born in Sicily. He began, his accent thickening slightly as he spoke of his heritage. He brought the old ways with him when he came to America. Built this family on those traditions. One of those traditions is about children, specifically about who feeds them. I don't understand. In the old families, blood isn't the only thing that makes family. Milk does, too. Vincent's eyes were intense, burning with something Jessica couldn't name. When a woman nurses a child that isn't biologically hers, especially the child of Adon, she becomes bound to that family, becomes sacred to them. In the oldest traditions, she becomes what? Jessica's heart was pounding. The child's mother, Vincent finished. And in our world, Adon's child can have only one mother, his wife. Jessica stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said, trying to understand if he was saying what she thought he was saying. You can't be serious. I don't expect you to marry me, Vincent said quickly. This isn't medieval Sicily, but in my world, what you did on that plane, it means something. It means you're under my family's protection now, whether you want it or not. It means other families will see you as connected to us. And it means, he stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. It means I can't let you walk away. Can't let me. Jessica's voice rose. You don't own me. I'm not some possession you can claim because of an old superstition. It's not a superstition to the people I deal with. Vincent's voice hardened. The moment word gets out that you nursed my son, and it will get out, Jessica. Things like this don't stay secret in my world. You'll become a target. Rival families will see you as a way to get to me. You'll need protection. My protection. Then I won't do it again. Jessica held Mateo closer. Even as the baby's whimpers intensified. I'll help him today. Make sure he's eating properly. And then I'll leave. No one needs to know. Rosa already knows. My driver knows. My security team knows. Vincent stepped closer, and Jessica fought the urge to back away. And in about 3 hours when my underboss comes for his weekly report, he'll know. By tomorrow, every family from here to Chicago will know that Vincent Romano's son has a wet nurse. That's how fast information travels in this world. Then tell them I'm just an employee, a hired nurse. It doesn't work like that. Frustration colored his tone. The symbolism matters. The act itself matters. You gave my son something precious, something intimate. In the eyes of the old families, that makes you precious. It makes you mine to protect. I'm not yours. But even as Jessica said it, Mateo let out a desperate cry, and she felt her body respond. Milk letting down despite her emotional state. The baby sensed it, too, rooting more frantically against her shirt. Vincent saw her cease, saw the understanding in her eyes that her body was betraying her resolve. He needs you, he said softly. And like it or not, you need me now, too. Because I promise you, Jessica Harper, the moment other families find out about this, your life will never be the same. Jessica looked down at the suffering infant in her arms, then back up at the dangerous man before her. Every rational part of her brain screamed to run, to get as far from this world as possible. But she was a nurse. She'd taken an oath to help those in need. And this baby, this innocent child who'd lost his mother the day he was born, needed her desperately. 1 week, she heard herself say. I'll stay 1 week. Help get him established on a bottle. Work with a lactation consultant to find a solution. But then I'm gone, and you tell everyone I was just a temporary medical solution. No weird mafia marriage traditions, no sacred bonds, just a professional arrangement. Vincent's expression was unreadable. 1 week, and I wanted in writing a contract that says I'm free to leave after 7 days with no retaliation, no following me, no claiming me as some kind of property. He pulled out his phone. I'll have my lawyer draw it up within the hour. Jessica nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She turned away from him, settling into the plush rocking chair positioned near the window. Privacy, she repeated. This time, Vincent left without argument, pulling the door closed behind him. Jessica heard him post someone outside. Of course he did. He probably had guards everywhere. But for now, she was alone with Mateo. Okay, little one, she whispered, unbuttoning her shirt with shaking hands. Let's get you fed. Mateo lashed on immediately, his desperate suckling gradually easing into the rhythmic pull of a satisfied infant. Jessica closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face as she rocked him. This was wrong on so many levels. She was feeding a crime lord's baby, sitting in a mansion bought with blood money, trapped by traditions older than America itself. But God, it felt right to have a baby in her arms again. To feel needed, to feel like maybe she could save this one, even though she'd failed to save Grace. Outside the door, Vincent leaned against the wall, listening to the silence that meant his son was finally eating. Finally at peace. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Tony, I need you here now, and bring the lawyer. He paused, listening to his underboss's response because we have a situation. The baby has a wet nurse. He could practically hear Tony's shock through the phone. In their world, everyone would know exactly what that meant. Yeah, Vincent continued, his voice grim. I know what the traditions say. That's why we need the lawyer. I need to figure out how to protect her without he stopped, not wanting to voice what the old ways would demand. What his grandfather would have insisted upon without question. When a woman nurses a Don's child, she becomes the Don's wife, not through ceremony or paperwork, but through an act older and more binding than any legal contract, through the sacred act of sustaining the family's heir. Vincent had told Jessica he didn't expect her to marry him, and he'd meant it. He didn't believe in forcing women into anything. Traditions be damned. But he also knew that in the eyes of every old-school family from New York to Sicily, the moment Jessica Harper had put Mateo to her breast, she'd become the Romano family's queen, whether she wanted the crown or not. And that meant Vincent had to protect her, had to claim her publicly as under his protection before rival families decided to make their own moves. Had to make it clear that touching Jessica Harper was tantamount to declaring war on the Romano family. He just had to figure out how to do that without making her hate him in the process. Inside the nursery, Jessica held Mateo as he nursed, completely unaware that she'd just become the most valuable and most dangerous woman in the American underworld. Unaware that Vincent Romano's rivals were already making plans, seeing opportunity in this unexpected development. Unaware that the man outside that door was already falling for her, drawn to her courage and compassion in ways that terrified him. Because in his world, love was a weakness. Love got people killed, but his son needed her. And increasingly, Vincent was realizing he needed her, too. 1 week, she'd said, 7 days to get Mateo eating properly, and then she'd walk away. Vincent stared at the closed nursery door and made a decision that would change everything. He'd give her the week, let her think she could leave, let her feel safe enough to lower her guard. And in that time, he'd show her that despite the darkness of his world, despite the blood on his hands, he could be what she and Mateo needed. Because 1 week wasn't going to be enough. Not nearly enough for any of them. For days into Jessica's 1 week, the mansion had become a strange kind of home. She'd been given a bedroom suite adjacent to the nursery for convenience, Rosa had explained, though Jessica suspected it was more about keeping her close and secure. The rooms were beautiful, decorated in soft creams and golds, with a bathroom that had a tub large enough to swim in. Everything screamed luxury and comfort and captivity. Jessica spent most of her time in the nursery with Mateo, feeding him every 3 hours, learning his rhythms, watching him slowly regain the healthy flush that babies should have. Vincent was there for almost every feeding, sitting in the corner chair like a silent guardian, watching his son nurse with an expression that twisted Jessica's heart. He never pressured her, never crossed lines, but his presence was constant and increasingly magnetic. He's gaining weight, Jessica said on the 4th evening. Mateo sleeping peacefully in her arms after his feeding. Another few days, and he'll be strong enough to try transitioning to expressed milk in bottles. But Vincent's tone didn't sound pleased. He looked tense, wound tight. His jaw locked in that way. She was starting to recognize meant he was holding something back. What's wrong? We need to talk. He stood, moving to close the nursery door more firmly. About the situation. Jessica's stomach dropped. What situation? Word got out. He ran a hand through his hair, messing the perfectly styled black strands. About you. About what you're doing for Mateo. 3 families have already reached out, making inquiries. Polite ways of asking if I've claimed you formally. His eyes met hers, dark and intense. If you're under my protection as just an employee or as something more. And what did you tell them? That you're mine. The words came out rough, possessive. That anyone who touches you answers to me. Jessica should have been angry. Should have railed against being called his. But something about the fierce protectiveness in his voice made her feel safe instead of trapped. So, I'm a prisoner here. You're protected here. Vincent moved closer, and Jessica's pulse quickened. There's a difference. You can leave. I signed a contract, remember. But if you leave, I can't guarantee your safety. The Benedetti family has already made noises about wanting to meet the woman nursing the Romano heir. Why would they want to meet me? Because you're valuable. He stopped just short of touching her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. In the old ways, the woman who nurses Adon's child holds almost as much power as the Don himself. She's sacred, protected, and he hesitated. And what? And if something happened to me, you and Mateo would be the logical successors to control the family. The words fell like stones between them. That makes you dangerous to my rivals and valuable to my allies. Jessica's arms tightened around the sleeping baby. This is insane. This is my world. Vincent's voice softened. I'm sorry you got pulled into it. But Jessica, he paused, seeming to wrestle with something. I'm not sorry you're here. The confession hung in the air between them, charged and dangerous. Jessica's breath caught as she watched emotions flicker across his usually controlled face. Vulnerability wants something that looked dangerously like affection. Vincent, let me finish. He cut her off gently. These past 4 days watching you with my son, seeing him peaceful and healthy because of you. Jessica, you gave us both something I thought was lost forever. A chance at normal at family. I'm not your family. I'm just helping. You are family. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement so she could pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, his hand cooped her cheek with surprising gentleness. The moment you fed Mateo, you became family. Maybe not in the legal sense, maybe not in the way the modern world understands, but in the ways that matter to me, to my son. You're already ours. Jessica knew she should pull away, should remind him about their agreement, about the 3 days she had left before leaving. Should definitely not be leaning into his touch like a flower towards sunlight. This can't happen, she whispered, but her body betrayed her words, swaying closer to him. Why not? His thumb stroked her cheekbone, and Jessica felt the calluses there. Evidence that this man wasn't just a suit-wearing executive, but someone who knew how to use his hands, how to fight, how to survive. Because you're dangerous. Because your world is violent and dark, and I've already lost. Her voice broke. I can't lose anyone else. I can't watch someone else die. Understanding flooded Vincent's expression. Jessica flinched. How do you know about I had you investigated? He said it without apology. The moment you offered to feed Mateo on that plane, I had my people pull everything about you. I know about your daughter, about the SIDS diagnosis, about the fact that you haven't worked since it happened, that you've been in grief counseling, that you're rebuilding a life that feels impossible to rebuild. Jessica should have been furious about the invasion of privacy, should have slapped him and stormed out. But instead, she felt oddly relieved that he knew, that she didn't have to explain the gaping wound in her heart. Then you understand why this can't be more than a temporary arrangement, she said softly. Why I can't get attached to Mateo, or does she stop unable to finish, or to me? Vincent's jaw clenched. Jessica, I know loss. I watched Sophia die bringing our son into the world. Watched her bleed out while doctors tried everything to save her. I held her hand as the light left her eyes, knowing that I was losing my wife and my son was losing his mother before he'd even taken his first breath. Tears streamed down Jessica's face. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Just don't write us off because you're scared. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. These past few days, I've watched you be so brave. Enough to feed a stranger's child. Brave enough to walk into a world you didn't understand. Brave enough to love my son, even knowing you'd have to leave him. Don't tell me you're too scared to try. Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. And then he was kissing her. It was gentle at first, a soft press of lips that asked permission rather than demanding surrender. Jessica froze for half a heartbeat. Mateo still sleeping in her arms. Every rational thought screaming that this was wrong. But then Vincent's hand slid into her hair, and she melted into the kiss like she was coming home. He tasted like whiskey and danger, and something uniquely him that made her head spin. His other hand came up to cradle her face, holding her like she was precious, like she was sacred. The kiss deepened, and Jessica felt 16 years of walls crumbling around her heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Not for a week. I can't. You can. His voice was fierce now, desperate. I need you. And unless I'm completely misreading things, you need us, too. Jessica looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms, then back up at the dangerous, beautiful man, offering her a life she'd never imagined. A life that terrified her. A life that somehow felt more real than anything she'd experienced in months. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. Vincent kissed her forehead, soft and reverent. But I'm more scared of letting you walk away. Before Jessica could respond, Mateo stirred, letting out a small whimper. She automatically began rocking him, maternal instincts kicking in. Vincent watched them, and the expression on his face stole Jessica's breath. Possessive and protective, and full of so much longing it hurt. Let me put him down, she said softly. Together, they moved to the crib, a massive thing of carved wood and soft linens that probably cost more than Jessica's car. She laid Mateo down gently, and Vincent immediately adjusted the blanket, checked the baby monitor, performed all the little rituals of a father who'd been doing this alone for 2 months. When he straightened, Jessica was right there. And suddenly, the air between them was charged again. The nursery lights were dimmed, Mateo's soft breathing the only sound. They were alone in this bubble of domesticity. And Jessica felt the last of her resistance crumbling. I should go to my room, she said, but didn't move. You should, Vincent agreed, also not moving. We need boundaries. This is happening too fast. But when his hand found the small of her back, pulling her closer, Jessica didn't resist. When he kissed her again, deeper this time, with the hunger of a man who'd been holding back for days, she kissed him back with equal fervor. They stumbled away from the crib, mindful of the sleeping baby, until Jessica's back hit the wall, and Vincent was pressing against her, all hard muscle and controlled power. Tell me to stop, he murmured against her lips. I should, but will you? Jessica looked up into his eyes, those dark, dangerous eyes that somehow made her feel safer than she had in months, and made a decision that would change everything. The word was barely out before his mouth was on hers again, and Jessica forgot all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Forgot about his criminal empire, about the danger, about the fact that she'd known him less than a week. All she could feel was his warmth, his strength, the way he held her like she was something precious he'd been searching for his whole life. When they finally broke apart, both panting, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. 3 more days, he said. Your contract gives you 3 more days before you're free to leave. If you still want to leave after that, I won't stop you. I'll honor our agreement." His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "But Jessica, I'm going to spend those 3 days convincing you to stay. I'm going to show you that what we could have, what we could be, it's worth the risk. And if I still want to leave." Pain flickered across his features, but he nodded. "Then I'll let you go. I'll make sure you're protected. Set up somewhere safe where the other families can't touch you, but I'll let you go." Jessica searched his face, looking for lies, for manipulation, for any sign that this was a trap. But all she saw was honesty and a vulnerability that this powerful man probably showed to no one else. "Okay," she whispered. 3 days. Something fierce and possessive flashed in Vincent's eyes. 3 days, he repeated. Then he kissed her once more, soft and reverent, before forcing himself to step back. "Get some rest. Mateo will be hungry in a few hours." Jessica nodded, her lips still tingling from his kisses, and slipped out of the nursery. Her legs felt shaky as she walked the short distance to her room, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. She'd kissed him. She'd agreed to let him try to convince her to stay. She was falling for a man who probably had more blood on his hands than she wanted to know about. But God help her. When she was in his arms, none of that seemed to matter. Jessica locked her bedroom door and leaned against it, one hand pressed to her racing heart. In 3 days, she'd either be walking away from the first man who'd made her feel alive since losing Grace, or she'd be stepping fully into a world that terrified her. She didn't know which option scared her more. Down the hall, Vincent stood in the nursery, watching his son sleep peacefully. For the first time since Sophia's death, he felt something other than guilt and grief. He felt hope. He felt the stirrings of something that might be happiness. Jessica Harper had walked into their lives like an angel, offering salvation when he'd been drowning. And now, he had 3 days to make her understand that this thing between them wasn't just about Mateo needing a mother or about ancient traditions binding them together. It was about the fact that when he looked at her, he didn't see the broken nurse running from her grief. He saw his future. He saw the woman who could stand beside him, who could be strong enough to survive in his world, who could love his son as fiercely as he did. He saw his queen. The problem was Jessica didn't see herself that way. Not yet. She still saw herself as the woman who'd failed to save her daughter, as someone too broken to take on something as big as loving them. Vincent pulled out his phone and sent a text to Tony. "Cancel all meetings for the next 3 days. I'm not to be disturbed unless the city is burning." 3 days to convince Jessica Harper that despite the darkness, despite the danger, despite every rational reason she had to run, she belonged here with them in this strange fractured family that was somehow becoming whole again. 3 days to make her fall in love with them. Vincent Romano had built an empire through force of will and ruthless determination. Surely he could win one woman's heart in 3 days. As Mateo let out a soft sigh in his sleep, Vincent made a silent vow. He would give Jessica every reason to stay and no reason to leave. He would show her the man beneath the title, the father beneath the dawn, the heart beneath the armor. And if she still chose to leave after that, then he'd have to let her go, even if it destroyed him. But first, he'd fight like hell to make her want to stay. The game was on, and Vincent Romano never lost. Not when it mattered this much. Jessica woke to chaos. The explosion shattered the pre-dawn silence, rattling windows throughout the mansion. She bolted upright, heart hammering, and her first thought was Mateo. She ran barefoot across the hall into the nursery, finding Vincent already there, his son clutched protectively against his chest. "What's happening?" Jessica's voice trembled. They made their move. Vincent's face was carved from stone. All vulnerability from their kiss the night before, replaced by the cold dawn she'd glimpsed on the plane. "The Benedettis. They just bombed my warehouse on the docks." Before Jessica could respond, Tony burst through the door, blood streaking his temple. "Boss, it's a distraction." They hit 3 locations simultaneously, and they left a message. He glanced at Jessica, hesitation clear. "Say it," Vincent commanded. "They want the woman. They said if you don't hand over the Romanos' wet nurse by midnight, they'll level every property you own." The room spun around Jessica. This was her fault. Her presence had painted a target on this family. "Give me to them." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "If it stops the war, no?" Vincent's voice was absolute, brooking no argument. He handed Mateo to Rosa, who had appeared silently in the doorway. Take him to the safe room now. Then he was in front of Jessica, his hands gripping her shoulders with barely controlled intensity. Listen to me very carefully. You are under my protection. That means I would burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone take you. Do you understand? Jessica saw it then. The monster everyone feared. His eyes had gone black and cold, his whole body radiating lethal intent, but his hands on her shoulders remained gentle. Even as fury rolled off him in waves. They'll kill you, she whispered. They'll try. A dangerous smile curved his lips. They'll fail, but Jessica, his expression softened fractionally. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She should say. No, should demand he let her leave. And this before more people died. But looking into his eyes, seeing the fierce protectiveness there, she found herself nodding. He pulled her close, pressing a hard kiss to her forehead. Tony will take you to the safe room with Mateo. Stay there until I come for you. Don't open the door for anyone else. Vincent, I'll come back. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. I promise you, Jessica Harper, I will come back. We have 3 days left. Remember, I'm not done convincing you to stay. Then he was gone, barking orders into his phone as he strode from the nursery. Jessica stood frozen until Tony touched her arm gently. Miss Harper, we need to move. The safe room was deep in the mansion's basement, accessed through a hidden door in the wine cellar. It was surprisingly comfortable. A full apartment with bedrooms, kitchen, and enough supplies to last weeks. Rosa was already there with Mateo, the baby miraculously still sleeping through the chaos. How long will we be here? Jessica asked as Tony secured the heavy door. However long it takes, Rosa's face was grim. The dawn won't rest until every threat is eliminated. Hours crawled by. Jessica fed Mateo when he woke, her body going through the familiar motions while her mind screamed with worry. What was happening up there? Was Vincent safe? How many people were dying because of her? When Mateo finally went back to sleep in the portable crib, Jessica found herself pacing like a caged animal. Rosa watched her with knowing eyes. You love him, the older woman said quietly. It wasn't a question. I barely know him. That doesn't answer my question. Jessica stopped pacing, her shoulders slumping. How can I love someone whose world is so violent? Someone who probably has blood on his hands. My husband worked for the Don's father, Rosa said. 30 years in this life. It took him in the end. A rival's bullet meant for the old Don. But those 30 years, they were full of love, loyalty, and family. Yes, there was darkness. There's always darkness in this world. But there was light, too. Does the light make up for the darkness? That's for you to decide, Miss Harper. Rosa stood, moving toward the small kitchen. But I'll tell you this. I've worked for the Romano family for 40 years. I've seen 3 Dons, and I've never seen one look at a woman the way Vincent looks at you, like you're his salvation. Jessica was still processing those words when the lights flickered. Once, twice, then the backup generator kicked in, bathing everything in emergency lighting. What does that mean? Jessica's voice rose with panic. Rosa's face had gone pale. It means someone cut the main power. It means they're here. The sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere above them, muffled but unmistakable. Jessica ran to Mateo's crib, scooping him up protectively. The baby woke with a startled cry, sensing the tension. Then the lights went out completely. In the darkness, Jessica heard Rosa move closer, heard the distinctive sound of a gun being cocked. Stay behind me, the older woman commanded. All grandmotherly warmth replaced by cold efficiency. More gunfire. Shouting, the sounds of combat filtering down through the reinforced walls. Jessica clutched Mateo tighter, tears streaming down her face as she whispered nonsense reassurances to the crying infant. This was her fault. All of it. If she just walked away on that plane, the door to the safe room shook with impact. Once, twice. Someone was trying to break through. Rosa, Jessica's voice cracked. They can't get through that door, Rosa assured her. But Jessica heard the uncertainty beneath the confidence. It's reinforced steel. It would take an explosion rock the room. Smaller than the warehouse blast, but devastating in the confined space. Jessica's ears rang as smoke poured through a crack that had appeared in the supposedly impenetrable door. Rosa shoved Jessica toward the back of the safe room. There's an emergency exit behind the bookshelf. Take Mateo and run. What about you? I'll slow them down. Rosa raised her gun, her expression resolute. Go, Miss Harper. The Don is counting on you to keep his son safe. Jessica ran, Mateo screaming in her arms, fumbling for the hidden latch Rosa had shown her during the safety briefing. The bookshelf swung open, revealing a narrow tunnel barely lit by battery-powered emergency lights. Behind her, she heard the safe room door finally give way. Heard Rosa's gunfire once, twice, 3 times. Heard a man's voice shout in Italian. Then she was in the tunnel, running blindly through the darkness with Mateo clutched to her chest, not knowing if she was running towards safety or into the arms of the enemy. Not knowing if Vincent was alive or dead. Not knowing if she'd ever get the chance to tell him that yes, God help her, she did love him. The tunnel seemed endless. But finally, Jessica saw light ahead. She burst out into the night air, finding herself in the woods behind the estate. In the distance, she could see flames rising from the mansion, could hear the sounds of combat. And then she heard something else. A car engine getting closer. Jessica turned to run deeper into the woods, but it was too late. The SUV screeched to a stop, and men poured out. Not Vincent's men. She knew that instantly from the way they moved, from the predatory smiles on their faces. One of them stepped forward, older with cold eyes and a smile that made Jessica's blood freeze. The famous wet nurse, he said in heavily accented English. Finally, take her. Jessica fought, screaming Mateo's name as hands grabbed her, but it was useless. They were professionals, and she was just a terrified nurse trying to protect a baby. The last thing she saw before they forced a cloth over her mouth was the mansion burning in the distance, smoke rising like a funeral pea into the dawn sky. Then darkness claimed her, and Jessica Harper disappeared into the night with the Romano heir in her arms, wondering if the man she'd fallen for would even survive long enough to search for her. Jessica woke in a room that reeked of old money and older sins. Her head pounded from whatever they'd used to knock her out, but her first thought was Mateo. She bolted upright to find the baby sleeping peacefully in an antique bassinet beside the ornate bed where she'd been placed. Relief flooded through her. They hadn't heard him. Awake finally, the voice came from the shadows. The older man from the woods stepped into the light. I am Salvatore Benedetti, and you, my dear, are worth your weight in gold. Where are we? Jessica's voice was Horo. My estate about 50 miles from the Romano mansion, or what's left of it. His smile was cruel. Don't worry. Your beloved Don is alive for now. I made sure word reached him about where to find you. Want him to come. Understanding dawned with horror. Of course. Vincent Romano destroyed my family 10 years ago. Killed my sons. Took my territory. Left me with nothing but scraps. And now he gestured to Mateo. Now he cares about something. Finally, after a decade of being untouchable, he has a weakness. 2 weaknesses, actually. He moved closer, and Jessica pressed herself back against the headboard. You and his precious heir. The sacred wet nurse and the son who bears the Romano name. Tell me, does he love you? I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play stupid. Salvatore's hand shot out, gripping her chin painfully. I've seen the reports. The way he looks at you, the way he's protected you. Vincent Romano hasn't cared about anything since his wife died. But he cares about you. And that is going to destroy him. He released her, smoothing his suit. He'll come for you tonight. I've made sure of it. And when he does, when he walks through those doors willing to trade everything for your safety, I'll take it all. His empire, his power, his life, everything. He'll kill you, Jessica said, trying to sound brave, perhaps. But first, he'll have to watch me hurt what he loves. And that will be worth dying for. The hours that followed were torture. Jessica stayed close to Mateo, feeding him when he cried, changing him with supplies Salvatore's people had thoughtfully provided. They wanted the baby healthy, wanted him as leverage when Vincent arrived. As dusk fell, Salvatore returned. He's here earlier than expected, actually. Your Don must be quite motivated. He hauled Jessica to her feet. Come, you'll want to see this. He dragged her to a large study. Mateo clutched in her arms and positioned her near the window where she could see the grounds below. Her heart stopped. Vincent stood alone in the center of the courtyard, illuminated by floodlights. No bodyguards, no weapons visible, his hands raised in surrender. But even from this distance, Jessica could see the coiled violence in his stance, the barely leashed fury in his posture. Benedetti, his voice carried clearly through the open window. I'm here. Let them go. Salvatore laughed. pushing Jessica closer to the window so Vincent could see her. The moment their eyes met across the distance, Jessica saw Vincent's mask crack. Raw emotion flooded his face. Relief, fear, love. Your empire for the woman and child, Salvatore called down. Sign over everything. Territory, businesses, operations, all of it. Make me Dawn of the Romano family, and I'll let them live. Vincent didn't hesitate. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't hurt them. Jessica's eyes widened with shock. He was giving up everything. His entire world, his power, his legacy for her and Matteo. Touching. Salvatore sneered. But I think we both know I can't let you live, Romano. You just rebuild. Come after me. No, you have to die. But first, you'll watch me take everything. He pulled a gun, pressing it to Jessica's temple. Starting with her, everything happened in slow motion. Jessica saw Vincent move impossibly fast for someone who was supposed to be unarmed. His hand went to his ankle, came up with a weapon. At the same moment, Jessica did the only thing she could think of. She bit down hard on Salvatore's wrist, making him jerk the gun away from her head. The shot went wide. Glass shattered, and then the world exploded into chaos. Doors burst open and Vincent's men poured in. They'd been there all along, hidden, waiting. But Vincent himself was already inside, moving like death incarnate. Jessica had never seen anything so terrifying or so beautiful. Salvatore grabbed for her again, but Jessica was done being a victim. She swung Matteo's bassinet at his knee. Thankfully, the baby was still in her arms, and the old man stumbled. It was all the opening Vincent needed. You touched what's mine. Vincent snarled, and his fist connected with Salvatore's jaw with a crack that echoed through the room. The fight was brutal, but brief. Salvatore was old, past his prime. Vincent was in his prime and fueled by fury. When it was over, Salvatore was on his knees, bleeding, defeated. Kill me, he spat. End it. Vincent leveled his gun at the old man's head. Jessica saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the cold calculation in his eyes. This was the monster, the killer, the Don who'd built his empire on violence. Vincent. Jessica's voice cut through the haze. He looked at her, and Jessica saw him wearing with himself. Saw the darkness battling with the man she'd come to know. He tried to kill you. Vincent growled. He put his hands on you. On my son. I know. Jessica walked closer. Matteo sleeping miraculously in her arms. But if you kill him like this in cold blood while I watch, you'll lose yourself. And I need you. Not the Don, not the monster. We need the man. The silence stretched. Then Vincent lowered his gun. Take him, he ordered his men. Turn him over to the families. Let them decide his fate for breaking the old laws by targeting a sacred woman. As Salvatore was dragged away, screaming threats, Vincent turned to Jessica. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then he crossed the distance in 2 strides, pulling her and Matteo into his arms. I thought I'd lost you, he whispered into her hair. When I saw the safe room breached, when I couldn't find you. Jessica, I thought I'd lost you both. You found us. Jessica pulled back enough to look at his face. You gave up everything to save us. I'd give up everything 1,000 times over. He cupped her face with shaking hands. None of it matters without you. The empire, the power, the name, it all means nothing if you're not here. The families won't accept that, Jessica said. You can't just walk away from being a Don. Watch me. His eyes blazed with determination. I'm done with this life, Jessica. I'm done with violence and death and living in darkness. You made me want something more. Made me remember there's light in the world. But the Romano family has a successor waiting. Vincent's smile was grim. My cousin Matteo, yes, I named my son after him, has been angling for the position for years. He can have it. I'm taking my son and the woman I love, and I'm walking away. The woman you love. Jessica's heart hammered. Did you think I'd give up my empire for just anyone? He kissed her softly. I love you, Jessica Harper. I loved you when you offered to feed my son. Loved you when you stood in my world and refused to break. Love you now, standing here covered in glass and dust, still protecting my child. Tears streamed down Jessica's face. This is crazy. Probably. I've known you a week. Best week of my life. Your world almost got us killed. I'm leaving that world for you. For Matteo. He kissed her again deeper. Say you'll stay not for 3 days, forever. Be my wife, Jessica. Not because of traditions or sacred bonds, but because I love you and I hope you might love me, too. Jessica looked at this beautiful, dangerous, impossible man. Thought about her weak in his world. Thought about how alive she'd felt in his arms. Thought about Mateo sleeping peacefully against her chest. This child who'd healed something broken in her heart. I do love you, she whispered. God help me. Then say yes. 6 months later, Jessica stood in a small church in Montana, wearing a simple white dress with Mateo, now chubby and healthy, babbling happily in Rosa's arms in the front pew. Nervous? Vincent asked, looking devastating in a dark suit, his hand warm in hers. Terrified, Jessica admitted, but in a good way. The wedding was small. Just Rosa, Tony, and a handful of others who'd followed Vincent into his new life. Jessica's parents were there, too, cautiously accepting of their daughter's whirlwind romance with the reformed businessman who'd swept her off her feet. They didn't know the whole truth. Didn't need to. That part of Vincent's life was over. The vows were simple. No mention of Dawn or empires or sacred traditions. Just two people promising to love each other through whatever came next. When Vincent kissed her, Jessica felt complete for the first time since losing Grace. This was her family now. Her impossible, beautiful, miraculous family. The reception was held at their new home, a ranch house on 50 acres of Montana wilderness, far from New York and the life Vincent had left behind. As they danced under string lights, Mateo sleeping peacefully inside, Jessica marveled at how much had changed. Any regrets? She asked against Vincent's chest. Not one. He pulled back to look at her. Though I should warn you, Tony got a concerning call today. The family's found us. Vincent's jaw tightened. Nothing threatening. Just checking in, making sure we're really out. And are we? He kissed her forehead. I made my position clear. I'm done. The Romano family belongs to Mateo now. My cousin Mateo, I mean. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with the Council of Families, who by the way officially sanctioned my retirement. Because of me, Jessica understood. Because I'm sacred to them. Because you saved the Romano heir when no one else could. Because you proved that love is stronger than power. Vincent smiled. The old families respect that. They won't touch us. As if on cue, headlights appeared at the end of their long driveway. Jessica tensed, but Vincent squeezed her hand reassuringly. A single car pulled up and a man in his 60s stepped out, well-dressed, carrying himself with authority. Don Marcelli. Vincent greeted him with careful respect. This is unexpected. Relax, Romano. The older man smiled warmly. I come as a friend, not a threat. The families wanted someone to deliver this officially. He handed Vincent an envelope sealed with wax. Your retirement papers signed by all 5 families. You're free. Truly free. Vincent opened it. Jessica reading over his shoulder. It was a formal document releasing Vincent from all obligations to the Romano family and the wider organization. Thank you, Vincent said quietly. Don't thank me. Thank your wife. Don Marcelli nodded to Jessica. What she did for your son, that kind of love, that kind of sacrifice, it reminded us all why we have these traditions. Why we protect women and children above all else. She earned your freedom, Romano. Both of yours. He tipped his hat and left as quickly as he'd arrived. Jessica and Vincent stood in the driveway long after the tail lights disappeared, the document still clutched in his hand. It's really over, Jessica whispered. It's really over. Vincent pulled her close. New life, new beginning. Just us and Mateo. He smiled. And maybe someday a little brother or sister for him. Jessica's hand went to her stomach where their secret was still too new to be visible. Maybe sooner than you think. Vincent's eyes widened. Are you 3 weeks along? I wanted to tell you after the wedding. She bit her lip nervously. Is that okay? His answer was to sweep her into his arms and spin her around, laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, both of them were crying happy tears. More than okay, Jessica. You've given me everything. A reason to live, a reason to love, a future worth having. You gave me that, too. She kissed him softly. You and Mateo, you saved me when I thought I couldn't be saved. They stood in the Montana darkness, the stars brilliant overhead, with their past behind them and their future stretching ahead bright and full of possibility. Inside, Mateo let out a small cry. They broke apart with matching smiles. Parents now, partners, lovers, friends. He's hungry, Jessica said. Then let's go feed our son. Vincent took her hand together, the way it should be. As they walked inside, Jessica looked back once at the driveway where the dawn had delivered their freedom. at the dark trees beyond that hid nothing more dangerous than wildlife, at the stars that witnessed their happy ending. She'd walked into a storm 6 months ago on that airplane. She'd found the most dangerous man in America and fed his child. And somehow, impossibly, miraculously, she'd found her home. Not in a place, but in a person. In a man who'd given up an empire for love. In a baby who'd needed her as much as she'd needed him. In a family built not on blood or tradition, but on choice. Jessica Harper had finally found where she belonged, and she was never letting go. 3 years into their Montana life, Jessica woke to the sound of tiny feet pattering across hardwood floors. At 2.5, Mateo had discovered the joy of early morning adventures, and this particular morning found him attempting to reach the cookie jar on the kitchen counter. "Mama," he called out, the word that never failed to make Jessica's heart swell. "Cookie, please." Vincent appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, wearing nothing but low-slung pajama pants. He scooped up his son with practiced ease, pressing a kiss to the top of the boy's dark head. "Good morning to you too, little man. But breakfast first, then maybe a cookie." Jessica leaned against the doorframe, one hand resting on her growing belly where their second child grew strong and active. At 7 months pregnant, she moved more carefully now, but the fear that had plagued her early months had given way to cautious hope. "This baby kicks like a soccer player," she said, feeling another strong movement. Vincent's eyes softened as he approached her. Mateo balanced on one hip. He placed his free hand over hers, and as if responding to his father's touch, the baby shifted. He knows his papa's voice. Mateo wiggled down from Vincent's arms and toddled over to Jessica, pressing his small hands to her belly. "Baby brother," he announced with the confidence of a child who'd been told this many times. "That's right, sweetheart. Baby brother." Jessica stroked Mateo's hair, marveling at how completely this child had healed the broken places in her heart. He called her Mama now, had for over a year, and Vincent simply introduced her as Mateo's mother. No explanations, no qualifications. In their world, biology mattered less than love. The morning routine had become sacred to them. Vincent made breakfast while Jessica helped Mateo wash his hands and face. No staff, no bodyguards, just a family starting their day together. The ranch house felt alive with their voices, with Mateo's laughter, with the promise of the new baby who would join them soon. As they sat down to eat, Vincent's phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at it, and Jessica saw his expression shift almost imperceptibly. "Who is it?" "Tony," he said quietly. "Nothing urgent. It can wait." But Jessica had learned to read the subtle signs. The way Vincent's jaw tightened slightly, the protective way his hand moved to rest on hers. She'd been part of his world long enough to know when something was stirring in the shadows they'd left behind. After breakfast, while Mateo napped, Vincent finally returned Tony's call. Jessica pretended to read in the living room, but she could hear the low murmur of conversation from his study. When he emerged 20 minutes later, his face was carefully neutral. "What is it?" Jessica set down her book. Vincent sat beside her on the couch, pulling her against his side. "Tony says there's been some noise. Nothing directed at us specifically, but Vincent Romano's name has been mentioned in some circles. Someone asking questions about where I went, whether I'm really out." Jessica felt ice form in her stomach. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that usually come before someone decides to test boundaries," Vincent said carefully. He kissed the top of her head. "I'm probably being paranoid. We've been quiet for 3 years. The families respect the agreement." But his hands were gentle on her belly, protective, and Jessica knew he was thinking the same thing she was. They had more to protect now. The next few weeks passed peacefully, but Jessica noticed small changes. Vincent was more aware of their surroundings, more careful about their routines. He'd started carrying again, the weight of the gun, a familiar presence that had been absent for years. He tried to hide it from her, but Jessica had learned to read him too well. The first real sign of trouble came on a Thursday afternoon in town. Jessica had driven into Bozeman for a prenatal appointment. Mateo buckled safely in his car seat, chattering about the horses they'd seen on the drive. The appointment went well. The baby was healthy, growing perfectly, due date still 8 weeks away. Dr. Morrison smiled as she handed Jessica the ultrasound photos. "Everything looks great. You're doing all the right things." As they left the medical center, Jessica noticed a black sedan parked across the street. It wouldn't have meant anything in New York, But here in Montana, where everyone knew everyone and most people drove trucks or SUVs, it stood out. The car pulled away when they did, staying several cars back, but making the same turns. Jessica's training from Vincent's security team kicked in, lessons she'd hoped never to use. She took an unexpected turn into a grocery store parking lot, and the sedan drove past. Probably nothing. Maybe her pregnancy hormones were making her paranoid. But when they got home, she told Vincent anyway. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "You did exactly right," he said, pulling her close. "I'm proud of you for being aware." He spent an hour on the phone after that, calling contacts Jessica didn't know he still had. When he hung up from the last call, his face was grim. "We have a problem," he said. Vincent's cousin Marco had apparently been telling people that Vincent wasn't really retired, that he was building something new in Montana. Some young ambitious types in Chicago think there's territory to be claimed, a reputation to be made by taking down the legendary Vincent Romano. The old families would shut it down if they knew, Vincent explained, but these aren't family operations. These are independents, outsiders who don't respect the traditional rules. They see opportunity where others see sacred ground. What does that mean for us? Jessica's hand went automatically to her belly. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "It means we need to be more careful. It means I need to make some calls. And it means," his voice grew sad, "we might need to consider whether Montana is still safe for us." The thought of leaving their haven, their carefully built paradise, made Jessica's chest tight. This was their home. Mateo's first words had been spoken in this house. Their second child would be born here. But looking at Vincent's face, she knew he was already making calculations, already planning contingencies. That night, Jessica woke to find Vincent's side of the bed empty. She found him in Mateo's room, sitting in the rocking chair they'd moved from the nursery, watching their son sleep. "He looks so peaceful," Vincent said quietly when he noticed her in the doorway. "So safe. He has no idea there are monsters in the world." Jessica moved carefully across the room, her pregnant belly making navigation more challenging in the dim light. "That's how it should be," she whispered. "Children shouldn't have to know about monsters." Vincent looked up at her, and in the soft glow of the night light, she could see the weight of old decisions, old sins, pressing down on his shoulders. "I thought I could keep it from touching them." "Keep it from touching you." "You have." Jessica sat on the arm of the chair, running her fingers through his hair. "For 3 years, we've been just a family. We've been safe. We've been happy." But Vincent's expression remained troubled. "What if that's not enough anymore? What if the past won't stay buried?" "Then we handle it," Jessica said firmly. "Together, like we've handled everything else." The next morning brought Rosa, arriving unannounced with her usual efficiency and a suitcase that suggested a longer stay than her usual visits. "I thought you might need some extra hands," she said, surveying Jessica's pregnant form and the energetic toddler running circles around the kitchen. "Especially with all this excitement," Tony mentioned. Vincent shot a look at his old house manager. "You've been talking to Tony." Rosa's smile was serene. "I talk to everyone, dear. It's how I stay informed. And right now, everyone is saying that some very foolish young men are asking very dangerous questions about my family." Jessica felt a chill at the possessive way Rosa said "my family," including her and the children in that sacred circle. Vincent had often told her that in Rosa's eyes, anyone who belonged to the Romano family belonged to her as well, which meant Rosa would protect them with the same fierce loyalty she'd always shown. Over the following days, Rosa proved her worth. She was remarkably good with Mateo, entertaining him with stories and games that gave Jessica time to rest. She cooked meals that reminded Vincent of his childhood, filling the house with scents of basil and garlic and love. And most importantly, she provided an extra set of watchful eyes. It was Rosa who spotted the surveillance first. On Saturday morning, she casually mentioned over breakfast that the same truck had driven past their gate 4 times since dawn. Always different drivers, but the same truck. Vincent's face went cold. "How many men?" "At least 3 different ones that I've seen." Rosa's tone was conversational, but Jessica caught the steel underneath. "They're not very good at this. In the old days, we would have noticed them from a mile away." Vincent was already moving, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling this into local law enforcement. Sheriff Williams knows our situation." Rosa raised an eyebrow. "Since when do we involve the authorities in family business?" Since I have a pregnant wife and a 2-year-old son to think about, Vincent said firmly. I'm not the man I used to be, Rosa. I don't solve problems with bullets anymore. The sheriff arrived within an hour, a tall man with weathered features and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen everything small-town Montana could offer. He'd been briefed, Jessica knew, on Vincent's past and their reasons for seeking refuge here. Sheriff Williams had been the one to quietly smooth their path to becoming permanent residents. Mr. Romano, he nodded respectfully. Mrs. Romano. Rosa, what seems to be the trouble? Vincent explained about the surveillance, the reports from Tony, the concern that outsiders might be targeting his family. Sheriff Williams listened carefully, taking notes. I can increase patrols in your area, he said, and I'll have my deputies run the plates on that truck. If these are professional criminals from out of state, FBI might get interested. That should discourage casual troublemaking. After the sheriff left, the house felt different. More tense, despite Rosa's efforts to maintain normalcy. Mateo sensed it too, staying closer to Jessica and Vincent, his usual exuberant energy subdued. That evening, after Mateo was in bed, the three adults sat in the living room discussing options. Vincent had been in contact with old allies, calling in favors to get information about the Chicago group making noise about him. The news wasn't good. They're not rational actors, he explained. They're young, hungry, and they think taking me down will establish their reputation. The traditional families won't rein them in because technically, I'm a civilian now. Not their responsibility to protect. So we protect ourselves, Rosa said matter-of-factly. Like we always have. But Jessica saw the struggle in Vincent's face. He'd left that world behind, had promised her a life free from violence. Now circumstances were threatening to drag him back. I won't go back to being that man, he said quietly. I won't have my children grow up seeing their father as a killer. Then we don't let it come to that, Jessica said. We find another way. The solution came from an unexpected source. Sunday afternoon, while Rosa was teaching Mateo to make pasta, Vincent's phone rang. The caller ID showed an international number. Vincent answered cautiously. Zio Carmine. His voice held surprise and respect. Uncle Carmine had been his grandfather's brother, now in his 80s and living in Sicily. Vincent listened for several minutes, his expression growing lighter with each word. When he finally hung up, he was almost smiling. What was that about? Jessica asked. Word travels fast in our world, Vincent said. Uncle Carmine heard about the Chicago problem. Apparently, the old families take a very dim view of outsiders threatening their sacred agreements. Really? Vincent's smile grew wider. 3 of the 5 families have just declared that any action against us would be considered an act of disrespect against the ancient traditions. The Chicago boys just discovered they're not fighting a retired Don. They're fighting 500 years of Sicilian family law. And according to Uncle Carmine, Jessica couldn't help but notice that Vincent was using the older man's actual title now. The young men in question have suddenly found themselves with much bigger problems to worry about, like federal charges for some very recent, very stupid crimes that suddenly have witnesses willing to testify. Rosa nodded approvingly. The old ways still have teeth. It took 3 days for confirmation that the threat had ended. Tony called with the news that the Chicago group had been arrested in a federal sweep, charged with everything from weapons trafficking to attempted murder. The surveillance around their ranch disappeared overnight. Sheriff Williams stopped by to confirm that the out-of-state plates had left the area. Jessica felt the tension leave her body like air escaping from a balloon. She hadn't realized how much stress she'd been carrying until it was gone. That night, she woke to find Vincent in the nursery they'd set up for their coming baby, his hands resting on the crib rail. You're thinking about the future again, she said softly. Every day, he admitted. I used to think about the past constantly. All the things I'd done wrong, all the people I'd hurt. But now, all I can think about is the future. Their son or daughter would arrive soon. Jessica could feel it. The baby had dropped lower, and she'd been having irregular contractions for days. Dr. Morrison said it could happen any time now. I love you, Vincent Romano, Jessica said, moving into his arms. I love the man you were, the man you are, and the man you're becoming. Vincent's kiss was soft, reverent, full of promise. I love you too, Jessica Romano. More than I thought possible. More than I deserve. 4 days later, Jessica woke at 3 a.m. with contractions that made her gasp. These weren't the practice contractions she'd been having for weeks. These were purposeful, insistent, impossible to ignore. Vincent, she shook his shoulder. It's time. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Rosa took charge of Mateo, while Vincent helped Jessica through each contraction with the calm focus he'd once brought to much more dangerous situations. They made it to the hospital with time to spare, but not much. At 11:47 a.m., after 8 hours of labor, their daughter entered the world with a cry that announced her displeasure at leaving her warm cocoon. She's perfect, Dr. Morrison said, placing the baby on Jessica's chest. Absolutely perfect. Jessica looked down at the tiny face, the dark hair that matched both Vincent and Mateo, the tiny fingers that gripped her own with surprising strength. Hello, beautiful girl, she whispered. We've been waiting for you. Vincent's voice was rough with emotion when he spoke. What do we call her? They discussed names for months, but never settled on one, wanting to see her face first. Looking at their daughter now, Jessica knew without question. Sophia, she said, for your first wife, for the woman who gave you Mateo. Vincent's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? I'm sure. This way, she'll always be part of our family, part of our story. Sophia Rosa Romano opened her eyes then, as if approving of her name, and looked directly at her father. Vincent reached out with one finger to stroke her cheek, and Jessica saw his expression transform into wonder. She looks like an angel, he whispered, like hope made real. The first months with baby Sophia were a delirious haze of midnight feedings and toddler tantrums and overwhelming love. Mateo initially was jealous of his baby sister, but quickly appointed himself her protector. He would sit beside her bouncy seat and tell her long, incomprehensible stories about trucks and horses and cookies. Vincent threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he'd once brought to running an empire. He changed diapers and warmed bottles and walked the floors at night when Sophia was fussy. Jessica often found him just watching their children sleep, as if he couldn't quite believe they were real. Rosa stayed for 6 weeks, officially to help with the new baby, but really because she'd fallen in love with being a grandmother figure. She taught Mateo Italian lullabies and helped Jessica navigate the challenges of nursing while caring for a toddler. When she finally returned to New York, she left with promises to visit again soon. The months turned into seasons, and seasons into years. Mateo started preschool in town, where he charmed his teachers with his polite manners and infectious laugh. Sophia grew from a tiny baby into a curious toddler who followed her big brother everywhere. Vincent coached Mateo's little league team and built an elaborate playground in their backyard. Jessica returned to nursing part-time at the local hospital, finding joy in caring for other people's children while knowing her own were safe at home. They hosted barbecues for neighbors and attended school plays and church pancake breakfasts. They were, by every measure that mattered, a normal family. But sometimes, late at night, Jessica would catch Vincent staring out at the Montana landscape with an expression she couldn't read. Not sadness, exactly. More like amazement. What are you thinking about? She asked one such night, finding him on the porch after Sophia had finally fallen asleep. I'm thinking about redemption, he said quietly. How a man who destroyed so much could be trusted with something so precious. You didn't destroy everything, Jessica reminded him. You built things too. A business, an organization, loyalty among your people. Those weren't evil things. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. I remember the night Mateo was born, he said finally, when Sophia was dying and he was struggling to live. I made so many bargains with God that night. Promised I'd give up everything if they both could just survive. She died anyway. Mateo lived. And I kept living too, not knowing why I deserved to. Jessica took his hand. Maybe it wasn't about deserving. Maybe it was about becoming. Vincent smiled then, the expression transforming his face from brooding to beautiful. I like that better. Becoming instead of deserving. Their life wasn't without challenges. Mateo broke his arm falling from the barn roof when he was 5, sending Vincent into a panic that took hours to calm. Sophia developed pneumonia at 18 months, requiring a terrifying week in the hospital. Jessica miscarried when Sophia was 3, grieving a loss that felt different but no less real than her grief for Grace years earlier. But they weathered each storm together, their love deepening with every shared trial. Vincent's nightmares, which had plagued him for years, gradually faded as his days filled with softball games and ballet recitals and family movie nights. One evening when Matteo was 7 and Sophia was 4, Vincent came home from town with an unusual expression on his face. "I ran into someone today," he said carefully. "Someone from the old life." Jessica's heart jumped, but Vincent quickly continued. "Mario Castellano. He was visiting family in Billings, decided to drive over to see how we were doing." Castellano had been one of Vincent's most trusted lieutenants, a man known for his loyalty and discretion. What did he want? To pay his respects, Vincent said. To see for himself that the stories were true. That Vincent Romano really had found peace. He talked about Jessica with admiration, about how word had spread even to New York about the nurse who'd tamed the most dangerous man in America. "He called you a miracle worker." Jessica blushed. "What did you tell him?" "That he was right. That love had made me into someone I never thought I could be. That my family was the greatest achievement of my life." Mario had brought news from New York. Vincent's cousin Marco was doing well as head of the Romano family, ruling with a combination of Vincent's strategic mind and his own innate diplomacy. The old rivalries had settled into routine business arrangements. The Benedetti family, lacking strong leadership after Salvatore's death in federal custody, had been absorbed into other organizations. The world Vincent had left behind was thriving without him. As he said it would, Jessica reminded him, "You prepared them well for your absence." The conversation had been easy, natural. Mario expressed no pressure for Vincent to return, no suggestion that he was missed in any professional capacity. Instead, he'd asked about the ranch, about Matteo's school performance, about whether Sophia had inherited her father's strategic mind. Like any old friend catching up on family news. When Mario left, he'd shaken Vincent's hand with genuine warmth. "You chose right," he'd said. "This life suits you better than the other one ever did." That night, Jessica found Vincent in his study, looking at a photo Mario had brought. It showed Vincent at Matteo's christening, holding his infant son while surrounded by men in expensive suits. The contrast with their current life was stark. "You don't miss it?" Jessica asked. "Not even a little." Vincent studied the photo for another moment before sliding it into a drawer. "I miss some of the people," he said honestly. "I miss feeling like I mattered in that world. But when I think about what I'd have to give up to go back," Vincent gestured toward the living room where their children's toys were scattered across the floor, where Sophia's artwork covered the refrigerator, where every surface held evidence of their life together. "There's no comparison." Jessica curled up in his lap, marveling as always at how perfectly she fit against him. "We matter here," she said. "To Matteo, to Sophia, to this community. You coach Little League and help with the church fundraisers, and last month you spent 3 hours fixing Mrs. Henderson's fence. You matter in ways that have nothing to do with fear or power." Vincent's arms tightened around her. "You gave me this life, Jessica. You and our children. You gave me permission to become someone worth loving." "You were always worth loving," she corrected. "You just needed to learn how to love yourself." As Matteo grew older, he began asking questions about Vincent's past. Why did they live so far from other family? Why didn't Daddy have any old friends who visited? Why were there sometimes phone calls that made Daddy's face look serious and worried? Vincent answered honestly, but carefully. He explained that he'd once had a different job, one that required him to make difficult decisions that sometimes hurt people. He'd left that job when Matteo was born because being a father was more important than anything else in the world. Matteo absorbed this information with the seriousness of a child who sensed there were layers he didn't understand yet. "Did you ever hurt anyone, Daddy?" he asked one afternoon while they worked in the garden together. Vincent paused in his weeding, considering his answer carefully. "Yes," he said finally. "I did hurt people. I made choices that caused pain. That's why I changed my life. That's why we live here now, where I can make better choices." "Are the people you hurt still mad at you?" "Sometimes people stay angry for a very long time," Vincent said. "But most of the people from my old life understand why I had to leave. They respect my decision to put family first." Matteo nodded solemnly. "Daddy." "Yes, son. I'm glad you changed your life." "Me too, buddy. Me too." Sophia, as she grew, showed signs of inheriting both her parents' best qualities. She had Vincent's strategic mind and Jessica's compassionate heart. At 5, she could negotiate complex trades with her brother, getting him to share his toys by offering carefully calculated exchanges of her own possessions. But she also noticed when other children were sad and would offer them her favorite snacks or invite them to play. She's going to be formidable, Rosa observed during one of her visits. That child sees everything and remembers more. Vincent, watching his daughter charm his old house manager into an extra bedtime story, just nodded proudly. She gets that from her mother. Jessica laughed. That manipulation is pure Romano cunning. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in October, when Matteo was 9 and Sofia was 6. Jessica answered without looking at the caller ID, expecting it to be the school nurse calling about one of their children. Mrs. Romano. The voice was unfamiliar, professional, but kind. This is Agent Sarah Chun with the FBI. I hope you have a moment to talk. Jessica's blood went cold. One moment, please. She covered the phone and called upstairs. Vincent. FBI. Vincent appeared instantly, taking the phone with the calm demeanor that had once made him legendary in crisis situations. Agent Chun, he said. What can I do for you? Jessica could hear only Vincent's side of the conversation, but his responses told her everything she needed to know. Someone was talking. Someone from the old life had been arrested and was offering information in exchange for leniency. Information that potentially implicated Vincent in crimes from his past. I understand, Vincent said calmly. Yes, we'll cooperate fully. Thank you for the courtesy of calling ahead. When he hung up, Jessica was already reaching for him. How bad is it? Vincent pulled her close. Potentially very bad. Tony got arrested in a federal sweep last week. Apparently, he kept more detailed records than anyone knew about. Records that go back to my time as head of the family. The FBI wants to interview me. Voluntarily for now, but that could change depending on what they find in Tony's files. Jessica felt the ground shift beneath her feet. After 7 years of peace, the past was finally catching up to them. What does this mean for us? For the children? Vincent was quiet for a long moment. It means I might have to face consequences for things I did a long time ago. It means there might be a trial. It means, his voice broke slightly, I might have to go to prison. The word hung between them like a death sentence. Prison meant separation. It meant their children growing up without their father. It meant the life they'd built together crumbling under the weight of Vincent's past. But it might also mean something else. It might mean freedom, Jessica said slowly. Real freedom. If you face this now, if you cooperate and take responsibility, maybe it finally ends. Maybe you don't spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Vincent studied her face. You want me to confess? I want you to do whatever gives our family the best chance at a real future, Jessica said. If that means serving time, then that's what it means. I'll wait for you. We'll all wait for you. Vincent's eyes filled with tears. You would do that? Raise our children alone, deal with the scandal, the judgment. You'd really do that for me. For us, Jessica corrected. This family is worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth whatever it takes. That afternoon, Vincent called his lawyer. Not the criminal attorney who'd handled mafia business for decades, but the family law expert who'd helped them with adoptions and estate planning. This required a different kind of counsel. Over the following weeks, a new plan took shape. Vincent would cooperate fully with the FBI investigation. He would testify truthfully about his knowledge of criminal activities, accepting whatever consequences came from that honesty. In exchange, he hoped for consideration of his cooperation, his retirement from criminal activity, and his role as a husband and father. The media attention was intense, but brief. The local papers ran respectful articles about the Romano family's place in the community, with quotes from neighbors and colleagues praising Vincent's character and contributions. The national media was more sensational, but Vincent and Jessica refused all interviews, maintaining dignity in the face of intrusion. Sheriff Williams increased patrols around their ranch, not because of any specific threats, but because he understood that notoriety brought its own dangers. Matteo and Sofia heard things at school, of course. Children repeated things their parents said, and some of those things were cruel. Jessica and Vincent prepared careful explanations, age-appropriate, but honest. Vincent had made mistakes before they were born. He was taking responsibility for those mistakes now. Sometimes good people had to face consequences for bad choices. Both children adapted with the resilience that Vincent had hoped to give them. Matteo appointed himself his sister's protector, walking her to her classroom each morning and sitting with her at lunch. Sofia, perhaps too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, simply continued being herself, confident that her parents would take care of everything. The trial lasted 3 months. Vincent testified for 2 full days, describing his knowledge of various criminal enterprises with the same detailed precision he'd once brought to running them. He named names, provided dates, corroborated evidence that federal investigators had been gathering for years. It was a complete and devastating cooperation that helped convict dozens of criminals. Jessica attended every day of the trial, sitting in the first row where Vincent could see her. Rosa came from New York to help with the children. The local community rallied around them, providing meals and childcare and moral support that moved Jessica to tears. When the verdict came down, Vincent was convicted of conspiracy charges related to his leadership of the Romano family. The judge, in sentencing, noted his complete cooperation with authorities, his genuine remorse, and the extraordinary character witnesses who testified on his behalf. Vincent Romano was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. It was less than they'd feared, but more than they'd hoped. Vincent would miss Sophia's elementary school years, Matteo's transition to middle school, birthdays and holidays, and ordinary Tuesday afternoons that made up the substance of family life. But he would return while his children were still children. He would have a chance to finish raising them. The day before Vincent reported to prison, they drove to the spot where they'd been married. The small church still stood peaceful among the Montana mountains, surrounded by golden autumn aspen trees. "This isn't goodbye," Vincent said, holding Jessica close while their children played in the falling leaves. "This is just, see you later." "I know," Jessica whispered against his chest. "I'm not afraid anymore. For the first time since that airplane 7 years ago, I know exactly how this story ends." "How does it end?" "It ends with us together. It ends with our children grown and happy and proud of their father. It ends with you free, really and truly free, in every way that matters." Vincent served 3 years and 2 months of his sentence, earning early release for good behavior and continued cooperation with federal investigations. Jessica visited every month, sometimes alone, sometimes with the children. Rosa visited. Sheriff Williams visited. Father Martinez from their local church visited. Vincent was never isolated, never forgotten, never without connection to the life that waited for him. Matteo wrote letters every week, describing school and friends and the books he was reading. Sophia sent drawings that covered Vincent's cell walls with color and imagination. Jessica sent photographs of their daily life, maintaining the connection that distance tried to strain. When Vincent walked out of federal prison on a Tuesday morning in March, Jessica was waiting with Matteo and Sophia in the parking lot. He looked older, thinner, but his eyes held the same love and determination that had attracted her from the beginning. Matteo, now 12 and almost as tall as his mother, hung back shyly at first. It had been 3 years. He'd grown from a boy to a young man in his father's absence. Sophia, 9 years old and fearless, ran straight into Vincent's arms. "Daddy, Daddy, you're home." Vincent caught her up, spinning her around as she giggled. "I missed you so much, baby girl." "I missed you too, but Mama said you were learning important things and you'd come back when you were done learning." She'd made it sound like college or training for a new job, and in many ways, that's exactly what prison had been for Vincent. A place to learn, to reflect, to prepare for the life that waited afterward. Matteo approached more cautiously, but when Vincent opened his free arm, he stepped into the embrace. "Welcome home, Dad. It's good to be home, son." The drive back to Montana took 2 days. They stayed overnight in a hotel that felt both strange and wonderful. Vincent had forgotten what it was like to choose his own meals, to sleep in a bed with his wife, to wake up to his children's voices instead of prison routines. That first night, after the children were asleep, Vincent and Jessica lay in the hotel bed holding each other. "I was terrified," Jessica admitted. "Not about the prison time, but about whether you'd still be you when you came out. Whether we'd still fit together after so long apart." Vincent stroked her hair, marveling at being able to touch her freely again. "I was terrified too," he said, "but for different reasons. I was afraid you'd realize you were stronger without me, that you and the children would be better off if I just stayed away." Jessica lifted her head to look at him. "Vincent Romano, in 7 years of loving you, when have I ever taken the easy way out?" "Never," he admitted, smiling. "Never once." "Then why would I start now?" The house looked exactly the same as when he'd left, except for the subtle signs of their children growing older. Mateo's artwork had progressed from crayons to sophisticated pencil drawings. Sophia had claimed a corner of the living room for an elaborate dollhouse city. Jessica's nursing scrubs hung in the laundry room, evidence of the career she'd rebuilt during his absence. His study remained untouched, as if Jessica had been certain he'd return to reclaim it. Vincent spent the first few weeks relearning the rhythms of family life, driving Sophia to dance class, helping Mateo with algebra homework, attending parent-teacher conferences and grocery shopping, and all the mundane activities that felt like miracles after years of institutional routine. The community welcomed him back with the same quiet acceptance they'd shown his family during his absence. Coach Stevens asked if he'd like to help with the high school baseball team. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that her fence could use another repair. Father Martinez invited him to help with the church's youth program. Slowly, carefully, Vincent began to rebuild his place in their world. The most difficult conversation came with Mateo, who was old enough now to understand what his father had really done in his previous life. They were working in the barn together, repairing equipment that had been neglected during Vincent's absence, when Mateo finally asked the question that had been weighing on him. "Dad, how many people did you kill?" Vincent set down his wrench and looked directly at his son. "7," he said. "7 people died because of orders I gave or actions I took." Mateo absorbed this in silence for several minutes. "Do you regret it?" "Every single day," Vincent said. "Those 7 families lost fathers, sons, brothers because of choices I made. There's no justification for that, no excuse that makes it acceptable. So why did you do it?" Mateo's question was curious, not accusatory. "Because I thought that was what strength looked like," Vincent said. "I thought controlling others through fear made me powerful. I thought violence solved problems instead of creating bigger ones." "What changed your mind?" Vincent smiled, thinking of a crying baby on an airplane, of a grieving nurse who'd offered the most precious gift imaginable. "I met your mother. She showed me what real strength looked like. Courage, compassion, the willingness to love someone despite the risk of losing them. She taught me that real power comes from protecting people, not hurting them." Mateo nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad you learned." "Me too, son. Me too." Sophia's adjustment was simpler, but no less profound. She'd missed having her father's presence during her early school years, but children are remarkably adaptable. What mattered to her was that he was home now, available for bedtime stories and weekend adventures and the 1,000 small moments that make up a childhood. Vincent threw himself into making up for lost time, but Jessica warned him against trying too hard. "They don't need you to be perfect," she said as he stressed over missing one of Sophia's soccer games due to a ranch emergency. "They need you to be present, to be consistent, to be the father they remember, not some idealized version who never makes mistakes." The first anniversary of Vincent's release passed quietly, marked by a family dinner and grateful prayers. The second anniversary came and went with barely a mention. By the third, it felt strange to even acknowledge the date. Vincent's prison years had become simply another chapter in their story, painful but not defining. As Mateo entered high school and Sophia became a confident middle schooler, Vincent found himself thinking less about the past and more about the future. College visits with Mateo, who showed academic promise that could take him anywhere he wanted to go. Dance recitals with Sophia, who'd inherited her grandmother Isabella's grace and her father's determination. Date nights with Jessica, rediscovering each other as their children grew more independent. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset over the Montana mountains, Vincent reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 20 years ago, he would never have imagined this life. 10 years ago, he thought it was too good to last. Now he simply accepted it as the gift it was. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never met?" Jessica asked, following his thoughts with the intuition that came from years of marriage. "If you'd never offered to feed Marco on that plane." Vincent considered the question seriously. "I think I would have lost him," he said finally. "The doctors were talking about feeding tubes, about hospitalization. Without you, I think my son would have died in those first few months. And without Mateo, I think I would have destroyed myself completely." Jessica squeezed his hand. "I think I would have stayed broken forever, lost in grief, unable to move forward. Grace's death had convinced me that I was meant to lose everyone I loved. You and Mateo taught me that love wasn't about deserving or earning. It was about choosing every day to build something beautiful together. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky. Somewhere in the house, Mateo was video chatting with friends about a school project. Sophia was reading in her bed, probably past her bedtime, but lost in a story too engaging to abandon. Normal family chaos, the kind Vincent had once thought was beyond his reach. "I love you, Mrs. Romano," he said softly. "I love you too, Mr. Romano. Now and always." 25 years after a crying baby had changed both their lives, Vincent and Jessica Romano sat surrounded by the family they'd built together. Their children were grown and thriving. Mateo had become a teacher, working with at-risk youth in Denver. Sophia had followed her mother into nursing, specializing in pediatric care. Both had found partners who loved them unconditionally and understood the unique strength that came from being raised by parents who'd overcome impossible circumstances. The ranch house showed its age now, but it was filled with grandchildren's laughter during holidays and family gatherings. Vincent's hair was silver, Jessica's showed threads of gray, but their love had deepened with each passing year. Vincent never returned to New York except for funerals, and then only briefly. Rosa had passed peacefully in her sleep at 91, surrounded by the extended family she'd loved and protected for 7 decades. Vincent had spoken at her service, describing her as the woman who'd taught him that family was about choice and loyalty, not just blood. Tony had been released from prison 2 years after Vincent, and they'd maintained a careful friendship built on shared memories and mutual respect for the lives they'd built afterward. Other figures from Vincent's past appeared occasionally, usually with requests for advice or assistance in transitioning away from criminal life. Vincent helped when he could, understanding the difficulty of leaving that world behind. The media had long since lost interest in the former mafia boss who'd become a model citizen. Occasionally, a true crime documentary would mention Vincent Romano's cooperation with federal authorities, but these references felt distant, like stories about someone else's life. On quiet evenings, Vincent would sometimes find Jessica in the nursery they'd converted into a craft room after Sophia left for college. She'd be working on quilts for their grandchildren or organizing photo albums that chronicled their extraordinary journey together. "What are you thinking about?" she'd ask when she caught him watching her. "The same thing I always think about," he'd answer. "How lucky I am. How impossible this all seemed, and how real it became. How much I love you. How grateful I am for every ordinary day we've had together." Jessica would smile and make room for him on the small couch, and they'd sit together surrounded by the evidence of their life. Photos of birthday parties and graduations and holidays. Children's artwork and school programs and love letters written during Vincent's prison years. The detritus of a life fully lived, completely shared. Sometimes visitors would ask Jessica if she ever regretted the choice she'd made on that airplane so many years ago. If she ever wondered what her life might have been like if she'd simply returned to her seat, leaving the crying baby and his dangerous father to figure things out alone. Never, she'd answer without hesitation. Not once, not for a single moment. That choice led me home. The end came peacefully, many years later. Vincent and Jessica died within weeks of each other. Jessica first from the cancer they'd fought together with characteristic determination. Vincent following shortly after, as if he couldn't bear to continue without her. They were buried in the small cemetery behind their church, their headstone bearing a simple inscription, Vincent and Jessica Romano. Beloved husband and wife, father and mother. Together they built love from grief, hope from fear, family from choice. At their funeral, Mateo spoke about parents who'd taught him that redemption was always possible, that love could transform even the darkest past into something beautiful. Sophia read the poem her mother had written about the airplane that had brought her the greatest love of her life. The church was packed with family, friends, neighbors, and former colleagues who'd made the journey to Montana to pay their respects to a couple who'd proven that any life could be redeemed through love. Sheriff Williams, now retired but still serving the community he'd protected for 40 years, spoke about the family that had chosen their small town as a refuge and had given back far more than they'd ever taken. Father Martinez offered prayers of gratitude for 2 souls who'd found their way to grace. After the service, as the crowd dispersed and the Montana mountains stood eternal witness, their grandchildren played in the churchyard where Vincent and Jessica had been married all those years ago. The youngest, a little girl with Jessica's compassionate eyes and Vincent's stubborn determination, found a dandelion growing between the cemetery stones and blew the seeds into the wind, making a wish for all the dreams her grandparents had already made come true. The seeds scattered on the breeze, carrying with them the story of two broken souls who'd found healing in each other, who'd built a love strong enough to survive anything, who'd proven that family wasn't about blood or tradition, but about choice and commitment and the courage to love without reservation. And somewhere in the vast Montana sky, perhaps Vincent and Jessica Romano danced together once more, eternal and free, surrounded by all the love they'd given and received, watching over the family that would carry their legacy forward into whatever beautiful tomorrows awaited.